Muy buenas, sé que este vídeo es algo muy distinto a lo normal, normalmente hago vídeos guionizados y esta vez va a ser una video reacción, ¿vale? En esta video reacción vamos a reaccionar a un vídeo de Necrit. Necrit, para quien no lo sepa, es un youtuber de habla inglesa que sube contenido de League of Legends, normalmente más centrado en el lore, ¿vale? No quiero tirarme mucho tiempo hablando ahora mismo, quiero reaccionar, no va a ser nada ni exagerado ni nada, simplemente vamos a reaccionar al vídeo y os voy a dejar, yo lo voy a ver sin subtítulos, pero os voy a dejar aquí abajo los subtítulos en español, ¿vale? Van a salir automáticamente, los voy a generar yo, no son generados automáticamente por YouTube, así que bueno, imagino que estarán mejor que los que te genera YouTube, a pesar de que me pueda equivocar en algo, pero vamos, en principio creo que puedo hacerlo con todo, simplemente para que sepáis y veáis el vídeo completamente en español.
Well, I'm back. Last time we had a look at the World of Riot's MMO, and we talked about how the overall world design has been done for a few years now.
Vale, ahora os
If
digo
you
algo.
have no idea what League's universe is about, I would recommend watching that one first.
Vale. ¿Por qué no he subido vídeo reacción de ese vídeo? Que es el vídeo justo anterior que subió a este que tiene que ver con el MMO. Es básicamente porque ya me lo he visto, ¿vale? Me lo vi cuando lo sacó. No pensé en hacer una reacción, así que simplemente lo vi y no quiero reaccionar falsamente, es decir... Ya me lo he visto, este por cierto no me lo he visto, así que perfecto, pero ese en específico sí que lo vi, así que bueno, os lo recomiendo ver, pero eso, no voy a reaccionar a él porque ya lo he visto, básicamente.
But now that we learned about the basics, we can dive into the other big MMO topic, the playable races and classes. When it comes to the races, just like the world, they are pretty much done.
Vale, antes de nada, yo también tengo un vídeo de clases y razas, así que estoy muy interesado en ver cómo de distintas son tanto las razas que él va a explicar como las clases que va a explicar, porque en mi vídeo pues las clases sobre todo serán algo genérico de League of Legends, algo más estándar, ¿no? Que suelen ser las de Controller, las de Enchanter, todas estas, pero tengo curiosidad en ver cuál ha añadido él. Razas, más o menos conocemos las de Runeterra, así que imagino que habrá añadido alguna más, pero veremos.
Over the years, the lore fleshed out the races of Runeterra, and now they each have their own unique story. In fact, at this point, it feels like we know Riot will not make up a brand new race. Of course, they could always theoretically do it, but I seriously doubt they would. Because that would be like forcing a new race into the world of Lord of the Rings. It would feel off among all the already established rules. I strongly doubt you wanna put a bunny person next to Aragorn. With that said, don't worry.
Vale. Lo que está diciendo básicamente es que es muy probable que no agreguen nuevas razas, al menos en un futuro próximo, en cuanto salga el MMO, por supuesto, porque ya tenemos un montón de razas y quizás se sentiría algo raro meter alguna nueva así de repente y algo forzada. Entonces seguramente tengamos las típicas Bastalla, Yordle, todas estas. Vamos a ver un poco qué comenta. Yo sinceramente pienso que obviamente para cuando salga el MMO tendremos las razas que ya conocemos de League of Legends, pero, o sea, del mundo de League of Legends, de Runeterra. Pero añadir nuevas razas en un futuro puede que sí sea algo, más que nada porque sabemos que el continente lo conocemos, pero hay otro continente al este que ya hemos visto actualmente que existe, así que es probable que en ese continente o en otros continentes haya otras razas que no conozcamos. Quién sabe si lo harán en un futuro o no, veremos.
Because the lore will allow Riot to make up new races and make them feel natural.
Mira, justo.
I'll show you their clever system in just a moment. But for now, just know that yes, we already know the races of this world. So the question is not going to be what races Riot is going to make up. The question is going to be, from the races that already exist, which ones will be playable? And perhaps more importantly, how will they be playable? You see, a few years...
Vale, básicamente eso, que bueno, lo estaréis viendo los subtítulos en español, que para algo solo os he puesto, pero eso, que piensa no solo que no van a meter todas las razas, sino cuáles van a meter de todas las que hay y cómo las van a meter. Así que vamos a ver.
Estoy muy interesado en este vídeo, sinceramente.
Este vídeo lo vi.
And today, I would not recommend you watch that video.
Vaya.
Back then, I was still clinging onto the idea that faction-based MMOs were a good idea. It worked for WoW, and it worked for my guilty pleasure, WildStar. Unfortunately, what I didn't know is that merely a year later, the idea of faction-based MMOs would crumble to dust. That's because factions have a massive flaw. Besides the fact that
Vale, básicamente estaba a favor de las facciones y ahora no tanto. Entonces dice que no recomendamos ver ese vídeo que subió porque hablaba mucho de un MMO basado en facciones. Vamos a ver un poco a qué se refiere exactamente.
PvP is almost guaranteed to be one-sided. I mean, who would want to play for the losing side? Especially if there is no compensation. Classic WoW is a perfect proof of that. Not to mention New World. But also, if you split everyone into two sides, you are splitting up your player base. And that is almost never a good idea. You simply don't want to prevent people from playing together. The reason why in the past it worked for WoW is because Blizzard heavily played into the faction pride. People were proud to fight for the Horde or the Alliance. But...
Vale. Es verdad que eso puede hacer que mucha gente esté separada en el servidor al tener facciones distintas. No sé cómo le hará Riot. A lo mejor lleva razón y no hace diferencia de facciones. Vamos a ver cómo lo hace, porque sabemos que en League of Legends tenemos un montón de regiones, que hay algunas que están en contra de otras, pero luego a lo mejor en un futuro no, en un futuro se ayudan para ir en contra de otra. Entonces... quizá es verdad y no haya facciones en el mundo de Runeterra, así que vamos, o sea, en el mundo de Runeterra quiero decir, en el MMO de Runeterra, así que vamos a ver.
Even back then, it really wasn't perfect. And then people started min-maxing the game and they realized that factions didn't matter. And that's where Riot has the edge. You may know that League of Legends has a lot of different regions, where they all act independently and they all have unique relationships with their neighbors.
Justo lo que he dicho.
Justo lo que he dicho. Forcing faction alliances into this world would ruin the already established lore. So PvP factions are most likely not going to be a thing. However, despite that, League absolutely has faction pride. People love it when a new Shuriman champion is announced, because people love that place. And people love it when the new champion is not Ionian, because goddamn we have too many Ionians.
Tenemos
muchísimos. Nearly every League of Legends player has a favorite region. And you bet when the MMO comes out, people will want to play for that region. And this is where the brilliance of Riot's world kicks in. You see, the fundamental lore of League of Legends is based around the idea that anyone can be from any region. After an event the story refers to as the Westward Migration, races mixed up all around the world. So it's not like there is a furry region where you can only see furries. There are definitely regions where you can see more furries, but this world doesn't have exclusives. This means that when...
Sí, básicamente que las razas las puedes encontrar por todas las regiones. Es decir, puede haber Yordles tanto en Piltover como en Ionia. Y puede haber Bastalla tanto en Ionia como en Shurima. ¿Sabes lo que te digo? Que no están exclusivas de una sola región.
You're picking up what you want to play. Besides just picking a race and a class combination, I strongly suggest Riot also allows people to pick their origin, with the origin being the starting region. Without a system like this, you would force all human champions to be, for example, Noxian. And that is simply not how this world works. So, I've been mumbling about how this world works for quite a while. So now, let's actually dive into all the races that exist in this universe. Spoiler alert, League doesn't have too many different races, because it's focusing on depth over variety. Of course, as it is with any RPG, there is the human race.
Eso es verdad, no tiene tanta variedad de razas. Es verdad que hay muchas, pero no tiene tantísima variedad. Lo que pasa es que todas esas razas son muy distintas. Es decir, los Bastalla, todos los Bastalla pueden ser muy distintos entre ellos. Tenemos los Bastalla que son los Marei, creo que eran los de agua, digamos. Luego tenemos algunos con plumas, otros más reptiles. O sea, hay una variedad increíble a pesar de que sean razas, sea una sola raza, que es Bastalla.
But it would be cool if the humans varied depending on their origins. For example, if you pick a human from the Freljord, they would be an Iceborn and they would have extra frost resistance.
Los Iceborn.
A Demacian could have a bit more magic resistance. Ionians could have a bit more nature resistance. Shuriman's heat resistance, and
Eso me gusta, Me gusta mucho lo de que si te piqueas un humano, por ejemplo, haya varias razas en cuanto a tipos de humanos. Es decir, humanos, más resistentes al hielo, que serían los Iceborn, que pueden aguantar ese hielo y las armas de hielo verdadero del True Ice. Y otros que sean más resistentes a la magia, por ejemplo, si eres un humano nacido en Demacia. Eso está muy interesante, ¿eh? Me gusta por dónde lo lleva, porque de una sola raza puedes sacar muchos tipos, y eso está genial.
I think it's going to be crucial for Riot to preserve the feeling of every origin feeling at least slightly different. This is an RPG after all, and despite the fact that balancing is usually a big issue, I strongly believe these RPG elements have to be preserved. But if Riot is afraid of people min-maxing the game from the very beginning, focusing on the origin stat with the most value, Riot can always do the safe thing and only give each origin different customization. In the Freljord, people tend to be more pale with lush beards and Nordic tattoos all over their bodies. Shuremans have the classic dreadlock style. People from Bilgewater have the pirate crew tattoos. Piltovans are your fancy mustache people, and Ionians have the wild untamed hair and beards. So even without special origin stats, I do believe these unique character customizations would enhance the region pride too. So that's...
Vale, básicamente no quiere que la gente elija, se centre simplemente en una raza, porque pues alguien que sea muy competitivo dice esta es la mejor raza porque tiene aguante a la magia, entonces toda la gente competitiva se va a hacer la raza de humanos que aguantan la magia, ¿sabes? En vez de hacerse uno de Freljord. Entonces tiene que haber alguna variación en cuanto a esto, por ejemplo, que ha comentado, para que la gente no solo se centre en una sola raza dentro de los humanos, por ejemplo, por poner un ejemplo.
That's what humans would be about. Pretty versatile and nothing too special in an RPG world. So now, let's have a look at the more unique races. After humans, the second most spread out race are the Vastaya. As we mentioned in the last video, the Vastaya are a race that came to be after humans started mating with magical animals. But the thing is, depending on where they are from, there are loads of different kinds of Vastaya. From cat boys to fox girls to lizard girls. In fact, here's a family tree of all the Vastayan tribes, and even this doesn't cover all of them. And this is where Riot can pull off something genius. As I said, this world already has set rules, so it would be very difficult to introduce a brand new race into this universe. However, it is going to be very easy to just make up a new Vastayan tribe.
Claro.
So
Cierto, podemos tener la raza Vastaya y que tú elijas ser un Vastaya Marai, por ejemplo, que está ahí, que pueden ser todas estas variaciones, que puedes elegir entre todas estas variaciones después, y si quieres seguir aumentando, en vez de añadir una nueva raza, un nuevo Vastaya, un Vastaya que tenga aspecto de murciélago, por ejemplo, que creo que ya había, pero bueno, para que os hagáis una idea, simplemente, o sea, pueden meter una locura, o sea, pueden tener para años.
I propose that Riot doesn't make the Vastaya as a playable race overall, but instead it would be cool if Riot let the specific tribes to be playable races. This would leave the door open for them to introduce new playable races later down the line. If they cross off all the Vastaya at once, they kinda shoot themselves in the foot. But I know, here I go mumbling about how the world
Eso me encantaría.
Again. So let's have a look at some of the specific tribes. When I say Vastaya, most people think of Ari. She comes from the Vasani that look like foxes. Although her tribe is mostly gone, the lore can justify new members to be found, so they can be playable. The Kilash tribe comes from the jungles between Shurima and Ishtal. These lion-like people are known for hunting dangerous beasts, and they take great pride in trophy collecting. It's the average mount collector. The Shimon tribe are monkey-like people from Ionia. While their older members are very wise, their younger members can be very goofy. The Otrani come from Mount Targon, resembling the classic goat people. Their hobbies are taking care of the Stellarcorns. The Lothland tribe are Ionians who resemble bird people. This tribe likes to combine the art of dancing with lethal assassinations. The Uvikat are something close to lizards, though they do have the ability to shapeshift. Out of all of the other tribes,
Esto estaría genial, además, lo que está comentando, que cada raza de Vastaya tuviese como esas habilidades, ¿no? Por ejemplo, esta sería la de transformarse. Estaría genial, ¿eh? Me gusta por dónde lo lleva. Eso sí, tantísima variedad, es lo que ha dicho antes, tantísima variedad también hace que sea más difícil el calibrarlo. O sea, el tener todos al mismo nivel. Vamos a ver cómo lo harían. Eso ya es parte de Riot. Imagino que también por cosa de calibrar, hay muchas cosas que podría hacer y no va a hacer. Entonces vamos a ver cómo lo hacen.
These are the closest to their pure blood ancestors. And we also technically have the Marai, the fish people whom I doubt are going to be playable.
Mira,
imagine modeling
hablando antes de ellos.
Now, these were the more pure blood.
Eso es cierto, no puedes comprar, o sea, no podrías buildearte botas en ese tipo de personajes. Ya está el chiste de League of Legends muy recurrente de comprar botas en Nami, pero bueno, se ve que en el MMO obviamente tendrás que tener algún tipo de botas, así que por eso piensa que seguramente no sea jugable. Pero a saber, en vez de botas quizás se le sustituye por otra cosa, así que vamos a ver.
Tribes. But there are many more Vastaya who don't fit any of these. For example, Set has an Ionian Vastayan mother and a Noxian human father. So he doesn't really have a tribe. Long story short, the Vastaya are an incredibly versatile race and Riot can use them in a million different ways. This is where they can really go wild. But that's it for the Vastaya. So now, let's have a look at the third most popular race. The Yordles.
Los Yordles, por supuesto.
These are the classic RPG tiny people. In League of Legends, people either adore them or hate them. There is no in between. Kinda like those guys. But not those guys, everyone hates them. There is no doubt in my mind that Yordles will be playable. Even though they have an interesting catch. You see, unlike all the other races on Runeterra, Yordles are immortal. They are essentially modes of magic that come from a hidden magical realm known as Bandle City. And because they are made of magical essence, when they die, we don't really know what happens. But we assume they return to the Bandle City and there they respawn. With that said, the lore suggests that maybe Yordles can die, but they just can't die of old age. But let's ignore that, that's a massive rabbit hole. So, you know, when it comes to gameplay, at least corpse running is going to make sense for them. Now, because Yordles are immortal, in most cases they are always happy and cheerful. Even their home realm is very colorful because of that. But then there is also...
Heimer, es decir, que no está tan contento en Arcane, porque a pesar de que no pueda morir, sí que ve morir a gente, claro.
Vex, a Yordle champion who has recently been added into League of Legends, who gives Yordles an interesting perspective. You see, unlike all the other Yordles, Vex hates living. She hates the bright colors and the cheerfulness. You know, it's the average League player. So
es básicamente el
anti-Yordle. In deep depression and agony. All she wishes for is to leave this world, but she can't, because Yordles can't die. Anyway, just
Pobre
like all
Vex.
the other races,
No puede cumplir su
Yordles can
sueño.
be found all around Runeterra. There is Poppy in Demacia, Kled in Noxus, Kennen in Ionia, Rumble in Shurima, and so on. But now, so far we have only covered the races which I'm pretty sure will launch with the MMO. The humans, the Vastaya, and the Yordles are the core
que son los
of
típicos.
this world. So now we are diving into the races that still exist in this universe. But it's going to be up to Riot if they make them playable. First of all, there are...
Yo efectivamente añadí yo los Minotauros y los Trolls. Veremos si añade alguna más o no. Pero yo creo que sí podrían ser jugables. Quizá no de inicio, quizá no las pongan y las pongan más adelante, pero... O sea, las tres básicas son Humano, Vastaya y Yordle. Estas estoy 100% seguro de que van a estar. Las demás veremos.
Are the Minotaurs. The Minotaurs are different from the Vastaya because they don't have magical ancestors. They are just a standalone race. Originally, the Minotaurs controlled the mountains south of Noxus. But because Noxus is Noxus, soon they absorbed the Minotaurs into their empire. With that said, some Minotaurs fled the tyranny of Noxus and they joined the other regions. A great example is Kryl, the Minotaur fighting in the elite armies of Demacia. And yes, the Minotaurs also have the stereotypical sexy female version in this universe, so they can easily be turned into a playable race. Next, in Bilgewater...
Que por cierto, el primer Minotauro que hemos visto es el que aparece en el juego de mesa, en el juego de mesa de Riot, es donde vimos que había un Minotauro en Demacia.
There is an incredible amount of weird fishy people. A lot of these could be really cool playable races when Bilgewater gets its expansion.
Cierto.
Although modeling helmets for a hammerhead shark is going to be interesting. We also can't forget about the trolls.
Ser un tiburón,
Previously,
imagínate.
I showed you the ice trolls, but there are also the sand trolls. And here's an interesting fact for League veterans. We have never seen a sand troll, but because of Ezreal's adventures, we know they exist. They should be around Icathia, which is where Jax is from.
Por eso se cree que Jax es un troll
So it is extremely likely that the mysterious Jax is a sand troll. Regardless, the majority of trolls are united under Trundle, the self-proclaimed Troll King, who is fighting in the service of Lysandra, who is a baddie even though she is morally right. So since the majority of the trolls are our enemies, I doubt they will be a playable race. Lastly, let's not forget that this universe also has Yetis. Fun fact, before everything got frozen, the Yeti civilization was very advanced. They even had their own technology based around magic. In fact, Willump, the Yeti Nunu is riding on, is a hologram from the Yeti technology. But then, as the civilization disappeared, the Yetis went a bit more ferocious. So no, they won't be playable either. But that's pretty much it for the races. As I mentioned, there aren't two...
Vale, eso ha mencionado básicamente las tres principales que seguro que estén y las otras que es probable que no estén. Veremos si las meten o no. Quizá en un principio no estén, o quizás sí, porque tres razas... Yo creo que mínimo 4 o 5 meterán de inicio, ¿no? No digo para la beta y para el alfa, digo ya para la salida del juego. Veremos cómo lo hacen. Vamos a ir con el vídeo. Que las clases me parecen muy interesantes.
That's why there are no dwarves or elves here. Runeterra is simply trying to be unique in every way, and so far, it is working. Now, I also have seen some people asking if Darkin will be playable. To which I have to say... That's like asking if you can play as a god. The Darkin are a corrupted version of the Ascended God Warriors. A single Darkin can annihilate an army of 1,000. In fact, the Darkin known as Aatrox is the only...
Claro, imagínate pillar un humano y que otro se pille un Darkin. O sea, ya simplemente por lógica de lore no cuadraría, ¿no? El hecho de que sea un dios contra un humano. Pero veremos.
That managed to kill a celestial god. He stabbed someone wielding the power of the aspect of war so hard, the aspect of war died. So no, I don't think Darkin will be playable. Anyway, with all the races covered, assuming Riot is going to use the origin system, this is what the playable races could look like. Humans are versatile.
Vale. Bastalla en Demacia no, obviamente, por lo de... Oye, pero... Ah, mira. Muy interesante esto, ¿eh? Muy interesante esta tabla que ha hecho. En Surima estarían los Kilas, sin Minotauros... Vale.
They are everywhere. There is not much to mention there. When it comes to the Vastaya, the common tribes can easily appear in Noxus, Piltover, and Bilgewater. These are the regions open to everyone. On the other side, the Vastaya are closely linked to spiritual magic, so you will hardly find one in Demacia, since it is a firmly anti-magic region. And somehow, not many Vastaya were ever mentioned in the Freljord, so Riot doesn't have to force them there. But then we have Shurima, Ionia, and Targon. Assuming these would be saved for expansions, they could be used to introduce new playable races.
Claro, cuando metan la expansión de Shurima, Ionia o Targon, porque seguramente sean expansiones, pueden meter también una raza nueva de Vastaya. En plan, metemos Shurima y además una raza llamada Kilas, que son un tipo de Vastaya.
I doubt all the newcomers remember
eso,
the names. The Kilash, Lothlan, and Otrani are the lion people, bird people, and goat
En resumen.
When it comes to the Yordles, as I mentioned, they can originate from anywhere, but they do avoid the Freljord and Targon because of the harsh climates. And yes,
Vale.
I know there were some prehistoric Yordles in the Freljord, but after it got covered in ice, they disappeared. And lastly, the Minotaurs can be found in the
Parece
Masia
lógico.
and Noxus. But it does make sense for some of them to flee to the Freljord, and others to travel to Ionia during the invasion. With all of this said, remember, this is just my decently educated opinion. Since the races are pretty much mixed up all over Runeterra, Riot could also lift the limitations and let every race
Sí,
start
básicamente
in
poner
every
límites
region,
por regiones.
and I would be fine with that. Some story would be wonky, but it wouldn't be anything horrible. Although, I still believe some racial exclusivity helps the feeling of RPGs. So, all of this is still only the first half of the video. If you wanna take a break and do your business without washing your hands, now's your chance.
No, aquí vamos directo, ¿eh? Ni stand-by ni nada. Pues mira, 5 segunditos que tenemos aquí para estar tranquilitos. Me está pareciendo muy interesante, sinceramente.
Okay.
Me gusta.
So far we only covered the races, which was definitely still the easy part. The much more difficult part are going to be the classes. This is where Riot is facing a great challenge. Partially, it's because there are inherently no wrong answers when it comes to designing a class system. You can really make anything work if you put some thought into it. But more than that, Riot is challenged by the setting itself. League of Legends currently has over 160 different champions. They each have unique abilities, and together they can define about 40 different classes. I counted them myself. From these, Riot has to pick only a handful to be playable, which means the majority of the classes won't make it in, and people who love those classes will be disappointed. Thankfully, I'm not a designer, so instead of trying to figure out how to make this work, I'm going to show you all the cool, unique classes this
Básicamente está diciendo que es todos nosotros. Es decir, nosotros no tenemos que hacerlo, vamos a dar nuestras ideas. Riot ya se organizará para hacerlo y ese es su problema, a ver cómo lo cuadra. Porque realmente hacer muchísimas clases es muy difícil de nivelar y veremos cuáles elige y cómo lo hace, pero eso ya no nos incumbe a nosotros.
And again, because region pride is a big part of this universe, you'll see that some of these are tied to specific regions. But not the warrior. That one is different in every single region. So let's start with that.
Claro,
the
es que muchas son
warriors in
distintas.
this universe provide a unique challenge on
Depende
top
de
of
la
the
región.
already difficult decisions. It's because in every region, the fantasy of a warrior is represented by something else. In Demacia, it is the Dauntless Vanguard. These are the classic knights in shiny armor pursuing justice. In Noxus, the traditional warrior would be part of the Trifarian Legion, which is a rank you can achieve after killing your best sparring friend in combat. These guys rarely use shields. In Shurima, the classic warrior is the warrior of the Golden Army. These are fighting for the glory of the Shuriman Emperor. In Piltover, you would have the Enforcers. Simply said, it's the cops. People will know these from Arcane. But in a way, the Wardens are the melee warriors of Piltover. But then, in the Freljord, warriors are represented by the Berserks, either wielding axes or giant blades.
Claro, pueden meter los warriors, eso es lo que ha dicho, y dependiendo de la región, que unos sean los berserker, otra la guardia intrépida, los enforcers, o sea, dependiendo la región que sean distintos el tipo de warrior.
They worship the primal god known as the Iron Boar. On Targon, we have the warriors of Rakor, which are somewhat themed after the classic Spartan armies. Then, in Ionia, the classic warrior is known as a Blade Master, with samurai-styled swords that have a rich history in this region. Also, there are the Vuju Blade Masters, which are on a totally different level. The Vuju technique is so powerful it was forbidden from using it in combat. The TLDR version of the story is that when Noxus invaded Ionia, Master Yi obliterated entire Noxian legions on his own. Before Noxians realized how overpowered he was, and they nuked the town where the Vuju Blade Masters were trained. So now there is no more Vuju Blade Masters, just normal Blade Masters. And lastly, the common warrior in Bilgewater would be a brawler. You see, I just named 8 different kinds of warriors. How is Riot going to handle this? I don't know. They could just make one warrior class and then just have the players play out the fantasy while wearing cool armor sets. Or they could make...
Claro, eso, pueden hacer un warrior que tenga diferentes sets de armaduras simplemente pero que sea un tipo de warrior, o hacerlos distintos como hemos visto por región.
So that every origin has a different skin of the class. You know,
skin,
all the
vale.
abilities would be the same, they would be doing
Vale,
the
vale,
same
vale.
numbers.
Eso estaría bien para nivelarlo. Si hacen que todas las regiones tengan el warrior, que se vea distinta estéticamente, pero, por ejemplo, eso, las armaduras de Noxus sin escudo y tal, pero que tengan las mismas habilidades. Claro que si el de Demacia tiene escudo y el de Noxus no, les metes una habilidad de escudo, quizá en el de Noxus el escudo sea que la armadura se potencia o algo así, y en el de Demacia simplemente que usen el escudo. Eso sí que podría estar bien si la habilidad hace lo mismo, porque sería más fácil de nivelar. Así que interesante.
But when a Noxian swings a weapon, there is a bloody trail, and when an Iceborne Berserk swings a weapon, there is a frosty effect. But again, this is for Riot to figure out. Now I'm just going to show you all the unique and interesting classes from this universe. In Demacia, we have the Mage Seekers. These are the people who hunt down mages. They carry with them a stone disc called the Grey Mark. This is the tool that allows them to absorb magic. So this would be sort of an anti-magic class. There are also a lot of iconic Demacian scouts. Also, Demacia has a lot of stories about theaters and bards. But Demacia also brought spotlight onto the Sentinels. The Sentinels of Light are people dedicated to fighting the undead. Because the undead can't really be killed with normal weapons. They use the relic stones that can be forged into any weapon. Be it a crossbow, a gun, a really big gun, or even a sword. Fun fact, in the lore, the Sentinel guns don't have triggers. You have to will it to fire with every fiber of your body. So of course, Lucian canonically fired it with his PP. Lastly, this will be unknown to even veteran League players, but Demacia put a really cool twist onto the Paladin class. You see, in League of Legends, when you play as Garen, his ultimate is to smite his enemies with a giant holy blade. This made people wonder, is Garen a mage? In Demacia? Actually, no. In the lore, Garen has never done anything even similar to this. And that's
claro, las habilidades del juego realmente son una visualización, además son habilidades muy antiguas. Garen incluso es un personaje muy antiguo. La R que tiene de la espada cayendo enorme, sí que es verdad que hay una cinemática en la que la usa, que la habré puesto por aquí. Pero aunque la usen esa cinemática no es canon, es muy antigua y son cinemáticas donde simplemente se les veía luchando con habilidades del juego. Actualmente sabemos que no utiliza la espada de esa forma. Pero lo curioso es que Sylas podía copiar la espada de Garen, así que veremos cómo habla de ello.
Most people in Demacia pray to the aspect of justice, which they call the Winged Protector. That's why Demacia has a lot of angelic statues. Coincidentally, the aspect of justice can also be found in League, its scale. So what's happening is that when Garen is casting his ultimate, it is not him magically creating a holy blade in the sky. It is actually the aspect of justice answering his call. So even though this universe doesn't really have a paladin class, which would be casting holy spells, this would be a really cool alternative.
Claro, utilizando el aspecto, no estarías utilizando magia y sí sería una especie de paladín, ¿no? Que utiliza como magia sagrada. Así que interesante cómo lo puede hacer Riot. Me gusta.
Who worship the aspect of justice and let her answer their calls. Pretty cool, but now let's move on to Noxus. Noxians are one of the only regions who harvest black powder, so they also have their own mercenaries with functional guns. In Noxus you can also find a lot of demonic cultists, so I would expect a warlock or a demon summoner, and they also have a few renowned assassin guilds. And the most unique of them all, Noxus also has a circle of hemomancers, people who follow Vladimir, a lord who used to be a hostage to the Darkin, and who eventually learned how to use their blood magic. So these people used the very same blood magic that shaped the Darkin. Then in Shurima...
Estos me encantaría como si fuese una clase que tú tienes que aprender in-game, ¿sabes? En plan, aprender la hemomancia. Estaría chulísimo. Veremos cómo lo hacen.
Arcane mages. These people follow Zerath, the most powerful mage on Runeterra, whose body has been reduced to nothing but arcane
Sería un tipo
energy.
nuevo de mago.
I would honestly love to see this class
el arcánico,
el arcano, perdón, the idea of having an Archon form on cooldown. Shurima also has some prophets who can open up tiny portals into the void and summon tiny void creatures. It would be sort of like Warlock in WoW. You know, use the power of the enemy against themselves. Then there are the Sand Shifters, people who can use the sand to create sand mirror images. And we can't forget about the Chronomancers, people who use time magic in a lot of creative, interesting ways. Then, in Piltover, riding off of the success of Arcane, people will want to play as a Warden, which is a more elite version of the Enforcers. These would be equipped with sniper rifles and stun grenades. On the crafty side, there are also the Hextech Engineers. These are the people who can use...
No me suelen gustar mucho las clases que son como muy mecánicas, no mecánicas jugablemente hablando, sino mecánicas mecanizadas, de máquinas, de utilizar tanto armas como tanques, como armas de este tipo. No me suelen gustar mucho, pero bueno, por supuesto, quiero que haya algún tipo de esta porque siempre le dan más variedad al MMO.
Science to allow them to wield magic even if they are not mages. And separate from them, there are also the Artificers. To them, anything from a powerful arm to blade legs should be possible. And down in Zone, I would love to see some kind of an alchemist who's using questionable drugs to...
Alquimistas estaría guapísimo, que pudiesen crear sus propias pociones, sus drogas que dice. Un poco de rollo Shimmer, todo esto estaría chulísimo. O sea, me encanta, a mí me encanta, por ejemplo, cuando en un MMO eres asesino y puedes crear tus propios venenos, tienes que buscar tus plantas, como ocurría en el Ragnarok Online, que tienes que buscar las plantas para hacer tu asesino con venenos, para untar esos venenos en la daga. Me parecía chulísimo ese tipo.
Help his allies. Next we go into the Freljord. Here we can find the Draklorn Inquisitors, which are Lysandra's followers with abilities themed around true ice. Essentially, these would be frost battle mages. But perhaps the most iconic for the Freljord would be the Shamans. These worship the animalistic primal gods of the Freljord. And
ya conocemos los Tamers, bueno, ¿cómo se llama? Los del WoW, que no me sale ahora mismo el nombre, lo pondré por ahí, que tiene ese tipo, pero aquí sería una transformación. Estaría chulísimo, que también se pueden transformar, por supuesto.
All their abilities mimic the primal gods, be it a bear, a fox, a mammoth, or a boar. Then on Targon we would find a lot of people with celestial powers. You know, calling down stars.
Magia celestial, básicamente.
But there are also the Solari, who use the power of the sun to enhance their attacks. They also wear massive plated armor, so this would be the tank class. Or the Lunari, who use the power of the moon to stay in the shadows. This would be more of an assassin class. Besides these, there are also a lot of Starcallers around, and even Draconic worshippers. Then in Ionia, besides the Vuju Blademasters, which would be far too overpowered, some people choose to fight without a blade. These would be the monks of Herat. They channel the power of Ionian dragons to empower their limbs.
Esta clase va a estar
seguro. Don't worry, they are a bit...
El típico monje va a estar 100%.
Different from the traditional monks. They are far more badass. Think
Son los monjes, pero más badass.
And more Dragon Ball. But of course, Ionia is also home to the Kinku ninjas. Their goal is to maintain balance in Ionia. This means that when a spirit starts killing people, the ninjas go out and deal with the spirit. And when people start terrorizing the spirits, the ninjas go out and deal with the people. Most of these are your classic ninjas empowered with spiritual magic. But some are using the forbidden shadow technique. And while they surely look evil, just like anything in League of Legends, it's not really one-sided. These ninjas are simply using questionable techniques to protect their homeland. And honestly, the Shadow Ninjas are so...
Si meten Shadow Ninjas o algo de las sombras, yo creo que va a ser una de las clases más elegidas, sinceramente. Porque suelen ser como las más queridas por los jugadores, pero veremos.
Iconic for Ionia, I really do believe they will be playable. Then we get to Bilgewater. Besides all the things that you could do
Piratas,
with pirates and monster hunters, the most iconic class of this place are the priests of Buru. The Buru worship the god of motion called Nagakeboros. While they are priests, they fight with full physical strength, while borrowing power from the god to empower themselves. Usually this means the god spawns tentacles to smack the enemies around. But they also have healing
como clase.
So that would be a really cool support class.
Claro, que la metiesen como support, claro, como healers.
In Riot's
Me encantaría
RPG
eso.
called Ruined King, you can play as Illaoi, the High Priestess of Nagakeboros.
Puede curar, puede tauntear.
And there you can see all the attacks she can pull off. And this takes us to the last place, Ishtal, which will most likely be saved for an expansion. As I mentioned in the last video, Ishtal specializes in only one thing: elemental magic. So if elemental mages become a class, and they should, even in League, elemental dragons are a core mechanic. They would
magia elemental va a haber. Entonces magos elementales
for
seguro.
All the unique classes this universe has to offer. Funnily enough, when I was drafting all these classes, I realized a lot of them fall under specific categories.
Oh, curioso. Warrior de Demacia, Dauntless Vanguard, lo que hemos visto antes. La Legión de la Trifarix. Golden Army, Berserk. Ojito, ¿eh? Ojito, esto ya si lo queréis ver, pues lo pausáis y eso. Imagino que comentará algunos, pero es verdad. Y quedan muchos huecos. Esto me recuerda un poco a las de Ashes of Creation, a las clases de Ashes of Creation, que depende cuál uses. Es básicamente Ashes of Creation, que mago de Freljord, pues eres bruja. Invocador de Demacia, escultor, que son los que esculpen estas criaturas de me saldrá. De Petricita.
So going with the skin idea for all the classes wouldn't be too unreasonable. But developing so many artistic variations of the classes
Mira, esto es
would be taxing. So overall, I believe Riot should not care about disappointing some players for not including their favorite class. With so many options, it's going to happen anyway. Instead, pick a couple of classes that simply make sense for you. You know, a Blade Master here, an Arcane Mage there, and just have fun. Having fun during development usually translates into great experiences. And I hope I'm not pressuring anyone by stirring up hype. If anything, I'm just happy that people find these videos interesting. And all I'm doing is presenting information that Riot released over the past 10 years. I mean, I know the video is interesting because Asmon only paused 3 times and he said,
"That's fucking cool."
And
I like it a lot.
And
that's what the fuck? This is actually really cool.
Este es del vídeo anterior.
That to me marks a big success. Next time we are going to talk about all the already established raid bosses of this universe.
Raid bosses, gente.
Which is a very personal topic for me. You know, I am a father, my son is 2 years old. So by the time this MMO comes out, he's going to be just the right age to heal my raids.
Vale, me ha parecido muy interesante, sinceramente, el vídeo, tanto de las razas y de las clases. Como veis, ha variado en muchísimas de las que yo había puesto. Y ha aumentado mucho más la información. Así que espero que os haya gustado. Y si el siguiente vídeo es de raids y queréis que reaccione así también, pues me lo decís en los comentarios sin problema y yo lo hago, porque me encanta reaccionar a este tipo de vídeos. Me encanta cualquier vídeo que tiene que ver con el MMO. Normalmente me los veo yo solo, así que si queréis que lo grabe, lo suba y además con subtítulos en español, pues mira, eso que nos llevamos todos. Así que nada, espero que os haya gustado este vídeo. Nos veremos en el próximo. No sé si será esta semana o la siguiente, pero bueno, en cuanto pueda estará subido, ¿vale? También subiré algún short. Y nada, espero que os haya gustado y nos vemos en el siguiente. Adiós.